The steady beep of the cardiac monitor was the only sound in room 307 as Elena Reyes checked her patient's vitals for the final time that night. Her 12-hour shift at Mercy General had stretched to 14, and every muscle in her body screamed for rest. Still, she managed a genuine smile for Mr. Peterson, the elderly man who'd been admitted with pneumonia 3 days ago. "You're looking better already," she said, adjusting his oxygen line. "Try to get some sleep tonight, okay? Dr. Chen will be by in the morning." Mr. Peterson's weathered hand caught hers. "Angel," he whispered through cracked lips. "My guardian angel. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you." Elena gently squeezed his hand before slipping out into the fluorescent-lit hallway. Guardian angel. If only he knew how far from angelic her life had become. Her nursing scrubs hid. The bruises on her arms. Souvenirs from her brother Marco's latest business associates who'd visited their apartment yesterday, demanding payment. The hospital corridors were quiet at 2 a.m., that liminal space between the chaos of admissions and the rush of morning rounds. Elena's footsteps echoed against the polished floors as she made her way to the staff lounge. Her mind raced with calculations. Rent was due in 3 days, Marco needed his medication, and her student loans had gone into collections. Again. At the locker room, she peeled off her scrubs, wincing as the fabric brushed against her bruised skin. The mirror reflected a woman she barely recognized anymore. Dark circles beneath eyes that had once sparkled with ambition. Her black hair hastily pulled into a messy bun, and her once full cheeks now hollow with exhaustion and worry. "Pulling another double tomorrow?" asked Trisha, a fellow nurse gathering her things. Elena nodded, forcing a smile. "Bills don't pay themselves. Girl, you're gonna work yourself to death," Trisha said, concern evident in her voice. "When's the last time you slept a full night?" Elena couldn't remember. Between hospital shifts, caring for Marco, and dodging loan sharks, sleep had become a luxury she couldn't afford. "I'm fine," she lied, the words so practiced they almost sounded convincing. As Trisha left with a worried backward glance, Elena opened her wallet. $20, her tip from helping doctor. Saunders with a difficult intubation earlier. It was supposed to be her grocery money for the next 3 days, but Marco's seizure medication was more important. She'd just have to survive on hospital cafeteria leftovers and coffee. The night air bit through her thin jacket as she exited through the emergency department doors. Chicago winters showed no mercy, and this February night was particularly brutal. Elena pulled her scarf tighter, her breath forming clouds in the freezing air as she began the 10-block walk home. Taking a taxi would eat into her precious $20, and the bus had stopped running an hour ago. 3 blocks from the hospital, she noticed him. A man slumped against the wall of an alley, seemingly unconscious. In a city hardened by poverty and crime, most people would have walked past, eyes averted, but Elena had become a nurse to help people, and that instinct didn't stop when she clocked out. "Sir?" she called, approaching cautiously. "Are you okay?" No response. Moving closer, she saw a pool of something dark spreading beneath him. Blood. Her training kicked in. Elena rushed forward, kneeling beside the man. He was well dressed in what appeared to be an expensive suit, though it was now torn and bloodied. Not the typical homeless person she'd expected. His face was partly obscured by a scarf, but she could see he was handsome, with strong features and surprisingly well-groomed dark hair despite his current state. "Sir, can you hear me?" She pressed her fingers to his neck, finding a rapid but steady pulse. His skin was cold, but not dangerously so. When she lifted his scarf to check his breathing, her fingers came away red. "You're bleeding. I need to get you help." The man's eyes suddenly snapped open, dark, intense, and startlingly alert for someone who'd appeared unconscious moments before. His hand shot out, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. "No hospitals," he growled, his voice deep and commanding despite his condition. "You're injured," Elena protested, her clinical gaze assessing the wound visible through his torn shirt. "That needs stitches and probably antibiotics." "No, hospitals." Each word was delivered with unmistakable authority. Even bleeding in an alley, this man was clearly accustomed to giving orders and having them obeyed. Elena should have been frightened. The smart thing would have been to walk away, to not get involved with a mysterious injured man who refused medical attention. But she'd never been good at walking away from people who needed help. "Fine," she conceded. But at least let me stop the bleeding. I'm a nurse." Something flickered in the man's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or calculation. After a moment, he released her wrist with a slight nod. Elena removed her scarf and pressed it against what appeared to be a knife wound in his side. Not deep enough to hit vital organs, but serious enough to cause significant blood loss if left untreated. "What happened?" she asked, maintaining pressure on the wound. "Wrong place, wrong time," he replied cryptically, his eyes never leaving her face. Elena didn't believe him for a second. Men in expensive suits didn't end up stabbed in alleys by random chance. This had the hallmarks of something deliberate, something criminal. But Chicago's code was clear. Don't ask questions you don't want answers to. You should really go to a hospital. She tried again. This could get infected. A humorless smile crossed his face. Hospitals ask too. Many questions. And nurses don't? She countered, surprised by her own boldness. The man's smile widened slightly, becoming more genuine. Apparently they do. As Elena continued to apply pressure to his wound, she noticed other details. The heavy gold watch on his wrist, the custom leather shoes now scuffed with alley grime, the signet ring bearing an unfamiliar crest. This was a man of wealth, possibly power, and yet here he was, bleeding in an alley, refusing proper medical help. "Can you stand?" she asked after several minutes of maintaining pressure. "This is just a temporary measure. You need proper care." With her assistance, the man rose to his feet, surprisingly steady despite his injury. He leaned against the wall, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Why are you helping me?" he asked abruptly. "Most people would walk by." Elena shrugged. "I'm a nurse. Helping people is what I do. Even people who might be dangerous." The question hung between them, an implicit admission and a test. Elena met his gaze unflinchingly. "Everyone deserves care," she said simply. "Besides, you don't look particularly dangerous right now." Something like respect flashed in the man's eyes. "Appearances can be deceiving, so I'm learning." Elena glanced at her blood-stained hands. "Look, I can't in good conscience leave you here. My apartment is a few blocks away. I have a first aid kit and can properly clean and dress that wound. After that, what you do is your business." She was offering to bring a potentially dangerous stranger to her home, a decision that went against every safety rule she'd ever been taught. But something about this man made her certain he wouldn't harm her, despite his cryptic warnings. The man studied her for a long moment before nodding. "Lead the way, nurse." "Elena," she supplied. "Elena Reyes." "Thank you, Elena Reyes," he said, her name rolling off his tongue with an odd formality. "You can call me Damien." Something told her that wasn't his real name, but she didn't press the issue. Together, they made their way slowly down the darkened streets, Elena supporting much of his weight despite her own exhaustion. The few people they passed gave them a wide berth. A bloodied man and a woman with crimson-stained hands weren't the sort of midnight encounter anyone wanted to investigate. Elena's apartment building was in one of the city's fading neighborhoods, once middle class, now sliding toward neglect. The elevator had been broken for months, so they climbed 3 flights of stairs, Damien's breathing becoming more labored with each step. "Almost there," she encouraged as they reached her door. She fumbled with her keys, acutely aware of how strange this situation was, bringing an injured stranger home in the middle of the night. The apartment was small but meticulously clean, despite the obvious signs of financial struggle. Mismatched furniture, patched curtains, the ancient television set. Elena helped Damien to her worn sofa. "I need to check on my brother first," she explained. "Then I'll take care of your wound." Damien nodded, his dark eyes taking in every detail of her modest home. Elena slipped into the apartment's single bedroom where Marco lay sleeping, his medication on the nightstand beside him. At 22, her brother should have been starting his life, chasing dreams. Instead, the car accident 2 years ago had left him with epilepsy and traumatic brain injury, dependent on his sister for everything. Elena checked his breathing, adjusted his blanket, and quietly closed the door. When she returned to the living room, she found Damien examining a framed photo of her and Marco from before the accident, both smiling, Marco proudly wearing his college acceptance letter. "Your brother?" he asked without looking up. "Yes." Elena gathered her medical supplies from the bathroom. "He was studying to be an engineer before the accident." She didn't elaborate, and Damien didn't ask. Instead, he carefully removed his bloodied jacket and shirt at her direction, revealing a muscular torso marked with scars, some old, some new, each telling a story of violence she could only imagine. The knife wound was 3 inches long, deep enough to require stitches but clean, a professional cut. Elena carefully cleaned the area, applied antiseptic, and prepared a suture kit she'd borrowed from the hospital for emergencies. "This will hurt," she warned, threading the needle. Damien didn't flinch as she began to stitch, his focus entirely on her face as she worked. "You've done this before," he observed, "outside a hospital setting." Elena concentrated on her stitches. "Living in this neighborhood, you learn certain skills. And keep hospital supplies on hand? Sometimes waiting for an ambulance isn't an option." She tied off another stitch, her movements practiced and precise. As she worked, Elena became uncomfortably aware of Damien's scrutiny, not of her technique but of the bruises on her arms, the dark circles under her eyes, the threadbare furnishings of her apartment. She felt exposed in ways that had nothing to do with medical examination. "Those bruises," he said as she finished the final stitch. "They're not from hospital work." Elena froze, then busied herself with bandaging the wound. "I'm clumsy." "No," Damien said with absolute certainty. "You're not. Your hands are too steady for that." He captured her wrist gently, turning her arm to reveal the distinct fingerprint bruises. "These were made by someone grabbing you. Recently." Elena pulled away, unnerved by his perceptiveness. "It's none of your business. You made me your business when you brought me into your home." His voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the words. "I brought you here because you needed medical attention," she countered, packing away her supplies. "Not to discuss my personal life." Damien studied her for a moment longer before reaching into his pocket. Elena tensed, but he merely withdrew a money clip holding a thick stack of bills. He peeled off several $100 notes and held them out to her. "For your services," he explained. "And for the risk you took." Elena stared at the money, more cash than she'd seen in months. It would cover Marco's medication, their rent, maybe even some of her student loan payments. But something about taking it felt wrong, like crossing a line she hadn't even realized was there. "I don't want your money," she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "I didn't help you for payment." Damien's eyebrows rose slightly. "Then why did you help me?" It was a simple question with a complicated answer. Because she'd sworn an oath to care for the sick and injured. Because walking away went against everything she believed in. Because sometimes, in a world that took and took and took, giving was the only power she had left. "Because you needed help," she said finally, "and I could give it." If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. Something shifted in Damien's expression, a barely perceptible softening around his eyes. Without a word, he returned the money to his pocket and carefully began to put on his blood-stained shirt. "Let me give you a clean shirt at least," Elena offered, disappearing into her room and returning with an oversized men's button-down. "It's Marco's from before. It should fit you." Damien accepted the garment with a nod of thanks, the simple courtesy seeming almost foreign to him. As he changed, Elena noticed a tattoo on his shoulder blade, an intricate design that looked vaguely familiar, though she couldn't place where she might have seen it before. "You should take these," she said, handing him a small bottle of antibiotics, one every 12 hours until they're gone, "and try to keep the wound clean." "You're giving me your own medication?" Damien asked, examining the bottle. Elena shrugged. "I can get more at the hospital." "Steal more, you mean?" "Borrow," she corrected with the faintest smile. "For emergencies." Damien pocketed the antibiotics, his expression unreadable. "You strike me as someone who follows rules, Elena Reyes. Yet you've brought a stranger to your home, performed medical procedures outside a hospital, and borrowed supplies. Why?" The question was probing, calculating even, but Elena sensed something beneath it. Genuine curiosity, perhaps, or the testing of boundaries. "Rules exist to protect people," she said after a moment's consideration. "When they stop doing that, sometimes you have to make your own judgments." Damien nodded, as though she'd confirmed something he'd already suspected. "A dangerous philosophy." "Perhaps." Elena glanced at her brother's closed door. "But necessity teaches. Hard lessons." The conversation was interrupted by a harsh pounding on the apartment door. Elena froze, her face draining of color. Damien immediately straightened, all traces of weakness vanishing as he moved with surprising agility to stand beside the door, out of sight from the entryway. "Who is it?" he mouthed silently. "Collectors," Elena whispered, fear evident in her voice. For Marco's medical debts. Damien's expression hardened. With a single fluid motion, he withdrew a handgun from beneath his jacket. A weapon Elena hadn't even realized he was carrying. Before she could protest, the pounding came again, more insistent. "Open up, Reyes! We know you're in there!" A gruff voice called. "Mr. Vega doesn't like to be kept waiting on his payments." Elena moved toward the door, but Damien blocked her path, shaking his head in silent warning. He gestured for her to move behind him, his weapon held low but ready. "Trust me," he whispered, his eyes intense. In that moment, Elena realized she had crossed into a world far more dangerous than she'd imagined when she'd stopped to help an injured man. Yet somehow, standing in her own apartment with loan sharks at the door, she felt safer with this armed stranger than she had in months. Damien opened the door just enough to reveal himself while keeping Elena shielded behind him. Two men stood in the hallway, one tall and muscular with a scar across his cheek, the other shorter with cold, calculating eyes. Both froze at the sight of Damien. "What the fuck?" the scarred man began, his hand moving toward his waistband. "I wouldn't," Damien said quietly, shifting just enough to reveal his weapon. "Now who sent you?" The two men exchanged nervous glances. "We work for Mr. Vega," the shorter one said, suddenly less confident. "This doesn't concern you. I'm making it my concern." Damien's voice remained conversational, yet carried an unmistakable threat. "How much does she owe?" 3,000, the scarred man replied automatically, then looked as though he regretted the admission. Damien seemed to consider this for a moment. "Tell Mr. Vega the debt is settled. Elena Reyes and her brother are no longer his concern." The collectors laughed, though it sounded hollow even to Elena's ears. "You can't just—" "I can," Damien interrupted. "And I am. Tell your boss that Damien Costas has taken over their debt. He'll understand." The effect of the name was immediate and alarming. Both men paled, the shorter one actually taking a step backward. "Mr. Costas," the scarred man stammered. "We didn't know. That is, we would never have." "Go," Damien commanded. "Now." The men retreated with mumbled apologies, nearly tripping over each other in their haste to reach the stairs. Damien closed the door quietly and turned to face Elena, who stood frozen in shock. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Someone who pays his debts," Damien replied, tucking the gun away. "You helped me tonight. I'm helping you. By threatening loan sharks with a gun in my apartment?" Elena felt hysterical laughter bubbling in her throat. "What happens when they come back?" "They won't," Damien said with absolute certainty. "Not after tonight." Elena studied the man before her, no longer the vulnerable patient she'd treated, but someone accustomed to power and violence, someone whose mere name sent hardened collectors running. In the span of one night, she'd somehow become entangled with a man who was clearly dangerous, possibly criminal. "You're not just some businessman who got stabbed in an alley," she stated. Not a question, but a realization. "No," Damien agreed. "I'm not. Are you going to tell me who you really are?" Damien considered her for a moment. "Would you believe me if I did?" "I don't know," Elena admitted. "But I think I deserve the truth after what just happened." He nodded slowly. "You do, but the truth comes with risks, Elena. Knowledge isn't always a blessing." "I think I passed the bless. A point of safety when I brought you home," she countered. "At least give me the courtesy of knowing what I've gotten myself into." Damien studied her with those penetrating dark eyes that seemed to see more than she wanted to reveal. After a long moment, he nodded. "My name is Damien Costas. I own several businesses in Chicago, some legitimate, others." He paused, choosing his words carefully, less conventional. "The man who sent those collectors, Vega, works for me, though he's clearly forgotten his place if he's sending thugs to threaten nurses in the middle of the night." The implication settled over Elena like a heavy blanket. She'd brought home not just any dangerous man, but someone who commanded others like Vega, someone at the top of whatever criminal hierarchy existed in Chicago's underworld. "You're part of the Mafia," she whispered. Damien's expression remained neutral. "I prefer to think of it as an alternative business structure." Under different circumstances, Elena might have laughed at the euphemism. Instead, she sank into the nearest chair, trying to process everything that had happened. She'd given medical treatment to a Mafia boss, possibly saved his life, and now he'd inserted himself into her financial problems. "Why were you in that alley?" she asked, trying to make sense of it all. "Who stabbed you?" "A disagreement with a former associate," Damien replied, his tone suggesting this was a significant understatement. Nothing for you to worry about. Nothing to worry about, Elena repeated incredulously. I just treated a stab wound on a man who carries a gun and scares professional thugs with just his name, and now that same man has taken over my brother's debt. I think I have plenty to worry about. Unexpectedly, Damien smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his face, making him look younger and almost approachable. You're either very brave or very foolish to speak to me this way. Probably both, Elena admitted. Exhaustion tends to erode my filter. Your honesty is. Refreshing. Damien checked his watch. It's late. You should rest. I've imposed on you enough for one night. You can't just leave, Elena protested. Your wound will heal thanks to your care. He collected his bloodied jacket. I have people waiting for me. Elena wanted to argue further, but realized how absurd it was to try to convince a mafia boss to follow medical advice. Instead, she walked to the door, suddenly aware of how utterly drained she felt. Your debt is settled, Damien said as he prepared to leave. Vega won't bother you again. Consider it payment for your discretion and expertise. I didn't ask for that, Elena reminded him. No, Damien agreed, his expression softening slightly. You didn't ask for anything, did you? Just gave what you could to someone in need. He reached into his pocket and placed something on her side table. Not money this time, but a business card bearing only a phone number. If you ever need anything at all, call this number, day or night. Before Elena could respond, he was gone, leaving her alone in the apartment with a blood-stained sofa, a bottle of antibiotics missing from her supplies, and the unsettling feeling that her life had just changed irrevocably. She picked up the card, turning it over in her fingers. What had she done by helping him? What invisible threads now connected her to Damien Costas and his world? And why, despite everything she knew about the danger he represented, did she find herself hoping she would see him again? Elena placed the card in her wallet beside her hospital ID, a jarring juxtaposition of the two worlds that had collided tonight. Then she checked on Marco once more before finally collapsing into bed, still in her clothes, too exhausted to even shower away the evidence of the night's events. As sleep claimed her, one thought persisted. The man she'd helped with her last $20 wasn't just any stranger. He was Damien Costas, the mafia boss who, she would soon discover, secretly owned the very hospital where she worked. 3 weeks had passed since Elena's encounter with Damien Costas, and life had returned to an uneasy normalcy. The loan sharks hadn't returned. Marco's medication was refilled, and even her student loan collectors had mysteriously stopped calling. Yet Elena couldn't shake the feeling that invisible eyes were watching her every move. She arrived at Mercy General for the night shift, nodding to the security guard who'd recently started greeting her by name. The hospital seemed different somehow, as if her newfound knowledge of its ownership had physically altered the building itself. Every security camera, every unmarked office door now carried sinister possibilities. You look better, observed Trisha as they changed into their scrubs. Finally getting some sleep? Elena managed a smile. Something like that. What she couldn't say was that for the first time in years, financial pressure had mysteriously eased. Bills were being paid automatically. Marco's expensive specialists had called to schedule appointments they'd previously been denied, and yesterday she'd received notice that her student loans had been refinanced at an interest rate so low it was practically charitable. She hadn't called the number on Damien's card. Pride, fear, or some combination of both had kept her finger from dialing. Yet the evidence of his influence in her life was undeniable. Did you hear about the new ownership? Trisha asked, pulling her hair into a tight ponytail. Some investment group bought controlling interest. Administration's in a panic. Elena's heart skipped. When did this happen? It's been in the works for months, apparently. They just announced it today. Trisha lowered her voice. Rumor is they're reviewing everyone's performance records. Some people think layoffs are coming. The timing couldn't be coincidental. Elena felt a chill as she realized the extent to which Damien might be inserting himself into her life. Not just paying off debts, but potentially controlling her workplace as well. Her shift passed in a blur of medications, charts, and patient care. Elena moved through her duties with mechanical precision, while her mind raced with unanswered questions. Was she now working directly for a crime syndicate? Would they expect something in return for their generosity? Just before midnight, she was called to the administrator's office, an unprecedented summons for a night shift nurse. With mounting anxiety, Elena made her way to the top floor where the hospital's executives worked. She'd never even been on this level before. The administrator's assistant, A severe woman with impeccably styled gray hair looked up as Elena entered. "Miss Reyes, they're expecting you in the conference room." "They?" Elena followed the woman's gesture toward a heavy wooden door at the end of the hallway. Her hand trembled slightly as she turned the polished handle. Inside, the spacious conference room was dominated by a long table of gleaming mahogany. At its head sat Damien Costas, impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, looking completely healed and utterly in command. Beside him sat an older man Elena recognized as the hospital's chief of medicine, and a woman in an expensive business suit whom she didn't know. "Miss Reyes," Damien greeted her, his voice carefully professional. "Please, join us." Elena took the seat across from him, acutely aware of her wrinkled scrubs and sensible shoes in this room of power and wealth. She met Damien's gaze directly, refusing to show the anxiety churning inside her. "Miss Reyes," the chief of medicine began, "we've been reviewing staff performance metrics as part of our transition to new ownership. Your record is exceptional." Elena remained silent, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "Stellar patient outcomes, perfect medication administration, additional certifications completed on your own time," the woman interjected, reading from a tablet. "Quite impressive given your circumstances." The slight emphasis on the last word made it clear they knew about her financial struggles, Marco's condition, perhaps everything about her life. "Thank you," Elena said carefully, still not understanding why she'd been summoned. Damien leaned forward, his dark eyes revealing nothing. "Costa's Healthcare Solutions has acquired majority ownership of Mercy General. We're implementing a new specialized trauma unit, and we need a head nurse who understands both clinical excellence and discretion." The implication hung in the air between them. This wasn't just a promotion. It was Damien creating a position for her, possibly one that would serve his organization's needs. "The position comes with significant benefits," the woman continued. "Doubled salary, comprehensive family health care coverage, flexible scheduling, and housing in the Blate, staff apartments adjacent to the hospital." It was everything Elena needed and more: financial security, proper care for Marco, an end to the exhausting commute. The offer was too perfect, too precisely tailored to her situation to be coincidental. "Why me?" she asked, looking directly at Damien. The chief of medicine and the woman exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with her directness, but Damien's lips curved in the barest suggestion of a smile. "Your capabilities speak for themselves," he replied smoothly. "And sometimes, Miss Reyes, the right person is simply in the right place at the right time." Elena understood the subtext immediately. This was his way of repaying her, of keeping her close, and possibly of securing her complicity in whatever activities his trauma unit would really cover. "I'd like time to consider the offer," she said, surprising herself with her composure. The woman looked affronted. "Miss Reyes, this is an extraordinary opportunity that many would—" "Of course," Damien interrupted. "Take 24 hours. The position and the offer will remain open until then." Elena nodded her thanks and rose to leave, feeling Damien's gaze follow her to the door. As she reached for the handle, his voice stopped her. "Miss Reyes, you still haven't used my card." She turned to face him, aware of the other executives watching their interaction with careful attention. "I haven't needed to. Yet you've accepted other forms of assistance," he observed, his tone making it clear he knew about the paid bills, the refinanced loans. "I didn't ask for those," Elena replied quietly. "No," Damien agreed. "You didn't." Something flickered in his eyes. Respect, perhaps, or curiosity. 24 hours, Miss Reyes." Outside in the corridor, Elena leaned against the wall, her heart racing. The offer was tantalizing, everything she'd worked for handed to her on a silver platter. But the cost was aligning herself with a man who lived outside the law, who commanded fear with just his name, who had wrapped his influence around her life like a silken cord that could become a noose at any moment. When her shift ended at dawn, Elena found a black town car waiting outside the hospital entrance. The driver, a stoic man with the unmistakable bulge of a concealed weapon beneath his jacket, opened the door without a word. "I didn't call for a car," she said, hesitating. "Mr. Costas requested I drive you home, ma'am." The driver's tone made it clear this wasn't simply an offer. Too tired to argue, Elena slid into the leather back seat. As the car pulled away from the curb, she noticed a small box on the seat beside her with an envelope bearing her name in elegant handwriting. Inside the envelope was a key card and a note. "Apartment 1000, 701, Lakeside Towers. For your consideration, D.K. The car didn't drive toward her neighborhood, but instead headed downtown, eventually stopping before one of Chicago's premier residential finest buildings. The driver opened her door, nodding toward the gleaming lobby. 17th floor, ma'am. The penthouse. In a daze of exhaustion and disbelief, Elena found herself ascending in a private elevator that required the key card to access the top floor. The doors opened directly into a stunning penthouse apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. The city spread out beneath the rising sun. The space was massive, elegantly furnished, and eerily prepared for her arrival. Fresh flowers sat on the dining table beside a folder labeled Trauma Unit Proposal. The kitchen was stocked with food, the bathroom supplied with expensive toiletries and her preferred brands. Most unsettling of all, the second bedroom had been equipped with a hospital-grade bed and all the medical equipment Marco might need. They'd been planning this, not just since the night she'd helped Damien, but methodically, thoroughly, creating a golden cage perfectly designed for her. Elena sank onto the sofa, the plush leather cool against her skin. The luxury around her was overwhelming, tempting. After years of struggle, of working herself to exhaustion, of watching Marco suffer in their cramped apartment, here was everything she'd ever wanted. All she had to do was surrender her independence, align herself with a criminal organization, and accept that her nursing skills would likely be used for purposes she couldn't begin to imagine. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. Elena approached cautiously, checking the peephole to find a woman in a sharp business suit. The same woman from the meeting earlier. Miss Reyes, the woman said when Elena opened the door. I'm Sofia Vasquez, Mr. Costas's chief of operations. I'm here to answer any questions you might have about the position. Did Mr. Costas send you to convince me? Elena asked, allowing the woman to enter. Sofia smiled thinly. Mr. Costas doesn't waste time on persuasion. He presents opportunities and allows people to recognize their value. She gestured around the apartment. I assume you've had time to examine the accommodations? They're excessive. They're appropriate to your new position, Sofia countered. The trauma unit will require you to be available at all hours. Proximity is essential. Elena cut through the pretense. What exactly would this trauma unit be treating, Miss Vasquez? Sofia's expression remained professional, but her eyes hardened slightly. Primarily, victims of violence who require medical attention without the complications of police involvement or official documentation. You mean criminals, Elena translated. People who've been shot or stabbed during illegal activities. Among others, Sofia acknowledged. Mr. Costas has extensive business interests that occasionally result in workplace injuries. And what happens if I decline? Sofia studied her for a moment. Nothing happens, Miss Reyes. You return to your regular position. Your brother continues to receive his current care. Your financial situation remains as it is currently. The implied threat was clear enough. The mysterious assistance that had eased Elena's burdens would disappear if she rejected Damien's offer. Why does he want me specifically? Elena pressed. There are more experienced trauma nurses at Mercy. Mr. Costas values loyalty above experience, Sofia replied. You demonstrated extraordinary loyalty by helping a stranger at personal risk, without expectation of reward. Such qualities are rare and valuable in our organization. After Sofia left, Elena wandered the apartment, her mind racing. Through the second bedroom window, she could see her current apartment building in the distance, a crumbling structure that represented years of struggle and sacrifice. The contrast with her surroundings was stark, almost painful. Her phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. Marco's new specialists called, promising treatment. Options available immediately. Decision is yours. D.K. Elena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of choice pressing down on her. For Marco, she'd already sacrificed so much. Her dreams of becoming a doctor, her social life, even her health. Would selling her skills and silence to a crime boss be so different? Wasn't she already compromised the moment she'd treated Damien's wound without reporting it? Hours later, exhausted but unable to sleep amid such luxury, Elena made her decision. She called the number on Damien's card. He answered on the first ring. Elena. The sound of her name and his voice, intimate and knowing, sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. I'll take the position, she said without preamble. But I have conditions. A pause, then a low chuckle. I'm listening. Marco lives with me in the apartment. His care remains my priority. I won't participate in anything illegal beyond treating patients who need help, and I maintain my regular hospital duties, alongside the special unit. Anything else? Damien asked, his tone suggesting he was more amused than offended by her demands. Elena took a deep breath. I want to know why. Why me? Why all of this? She gestured at the apartment, though he couldn't see her. This goes far beyond repaying a good deed. The line went silent for so long that Elena thought he might have hung up. When Damien finally spoke, his voice had lost its businesslike detachment, becoming something rougher, more genuine. Come to the address I'm sending you. Tonight at 8. You'll have your answer. The line went dead, and moments later her phone chimed with an address in one of Chicago's oldest neighborhoods. Elena spent the day moving Marco into the penthouse, explaining the sudden change in circumstances as a promotional opportunity with housing included. Her brother, always perceptive despite his injuries, studied their new surroundings with suspicious wonder. This isn't normal, Elle, he said as she arranged his medications in the spacious bathroom. Hospital promotions don't come with penthouses. It's complicated, she admitted, but it's legitimate work, and it means better care for you. Marco's eyes, so like her own, searched her face. What aren't you telling me? Elena sighed, sitting beside him on the specially designed bed. The hospital has a new owner. I helped him once, and now he's helping us. A random hospital owner just happens to give million-dollar apartments to nurses who help him. Marco's voice dripped skepticism. What kind of help was this? The medical kind, Elena clarified quickly. He was injured. I treated him. End of story. And now we're living in his building, Marco observed. That's not the end of the story, Elle. That's barely the beginning. At precisely 8 o'clock, Elena found herself outside an unmarked door in the city's Little Italy neighborhood. The building was nondescript, sandwiched between a traditional Italian restaurant and a tailor shop that had clearly been in business for decades. She knocked, and the door was immediately opened by a large man with the unmistakable demeanor of security personnel. He nodded once upon seeing her and stepped aside, revealing a narrow staircase leading upward. At the top of the stairs was another door, this one heavy and ornate. Before Elena could knock, it swung open to reveal Damien, dressed more casually than she'd seen him before in dark jeans and a charcoal button-down, the sleeves rolled up to expose muscular forearms. You came, he said, something like pleasure warming his usually guarded expression. I want answers, Elena replied, stepping past him into the space beyond. She found herself in what appeared to be a private apartment above the commercial businesses below. But unlike the modernist luxury of the penthouse, this space was warm, traditional, filled with antiques and family photographs. A fire burned in a stone hearth, and the air smelled of garlic and herbs. My personal residence, Damien explained, closing the door behind her. Few people know its location. Elena took in the unexpected domesticity of the space. Not what I imagined for a mafia boss. And what did you imagine? Marble statues and gold fixtures? Damien's mouth quirked in amusement as he guided her toward a comfortable sitting area near the fire. Something less normal, she admitted. Less human. Damien studied her for a moment, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight. That's the first mistake people make with me, assuming I'm something other than human. A woman in her 60s appeared from what Elena assumed was the kitchen, carrying a tray of food. She spoke rapidly in Italian to Damien, her eyes curious but kind as they assessed Elena. My Aunt Rosa, Damien explained after responding in the same language. She insists on feeding guests. Rosa set the tray down and promptly disappeared, though not before giving Elena an approving nod that somehow felt more significant than it should have. You promised answers, Elena said, accepting the glass of wine Damien offered. He settled into the chair opposite hers, suddenly serious. 3 years ago, my younger sister was in a car accident. Traumatic brain injury, multiple fractures, internal bleeding. The parallel to Marco's situation wasn't lost on Elena. She was taken to Mercy General, where the trauma team pronounced her injuries too severe for treatment. They essentially left her to die. Elena felt a chill despite the warmth of the fire. I'm sorry. I was in New York on business, Damien continued, his voice controlled but with an undercurrent of old pain. By the time I reached Chicago, she was gone. The hospital claimed they'd done everything possible, but my sources told me otherwise. They hadn't tried experimental treatments. They hadn't called in specialists. They'd taken one look at a young woman with no identification and decided she wasn't worth extraordinary measures. That's not how medicine should work, Elena said softly. No, it's not. Damien's gaze was intense, searching. When I looked into the hospital's practices, I found a pattern of differential treatment based on patient status. The wealthy received every possible intervention. Others were given standard care at best, negligence at worst. So you bought the hospital, Elena concluded. To change those practices? To ensure no one else loses family due to calculated indifference. Damien leaned forward. The trauma unit isn't just for my associates, Elena. It's for anyone who needs care without judgment or discrimination. People on the margins. People the system overlooks. Elena processed this, trying to reconcile the criminal businessman with this passionate advocate for equitable healthcare. That still doesn't explain why me. Why all? She gestured vaguely. This. Damien was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. When you found me in that alley, you didn't see a crime boss or a wealthy man. You saw someone in need. You gave your last $20 without hesitation, without calculation. How do you know it was my last money? Elena challenged. Because I know everything about you, Damien admitted without apology. Your financial records, your work history, the way you've sacrificed everything for your brother, your integrity in a system designed to break it. He rose, moving to stand before the fire. Do you know how rare that is, Elena? To find someone who acts purely from compassion, who can't be bought, bribed, or frightened into compliance. I'm not special, she protested. I'm just a nurse doing my job. Damien turned to face her, his expression intense. You're extraordinary, and I need someone extraordinary to help build something that matters. As Elena looked up at him, backlit by the fire, she realized with startling clarity that Damien Costas, feared crime boss, ruthless businessman, avenger of his sister's memory, was, letting her see behind his carefully constructed facade. This wasn't manipulation or seduction. It was vulnerability, offered with the same courage she'd shown when she'd helped a dangerous stranger on a cold Chicago night. I still don't understand why you're going to such lengths, she said softly. The apartment, the specialists for Marco, all of it seems excessive for a professional relationship. Damien moved closer, his proximity sending an unexpected warmth through her that had nothing to do with the fire. Perhaps I don't want merely a professional relationship, Elena Reyes. The admission hung between them, charged with possibilities neither had acknowledged until this moment. Elena felt herself drawn to him despite every warning bell in her mind, despite knowing exactly who and what he was. You're dangerous, she whispered. Yes, he agreed, his voice equally soft. But not to you. Never to you. His hand rose to brush a strand of hair from her face, the simple gesture, carrying more intimacy than any words could convey. Elena knew she stood at a crossroads. Behind her lay the safe, struggling life she'd known. Ahead lay a world of moral compromise, danger, and this man who blurred every line she'd thought was clear. As Damien's hand lingered at her cheek, his touch gentle despite the power she knew those hands possessed, Elena made her choice. She turned her face into his palm, a silent acceptance of everything he offered, and everything he was. In that moment, the poor nurse who had given her last $20 to a stranger sealed her fate with the Mafia boss, who owned not just the hospital where she worked, but now, perhaps, her heart as well. The transition from Elena's world into Damien's happened with surprising ease. Within weeks, she had established the trauma unit at Mercy General, staffed by a hand-picked team who asked no questions when patients arrived without identification, often in the dead of night. Some were clearly Damien's associates, men with gunshot wounds and knife injuries, who arrived with grim-faced security details. But many more were people from Chicago's forgotten corners. Homeless veterans, undocumented immigrants, sex workers, all receiving the same exemplary care, regardless of status or ability to pay. Elena maintained her regular hospital duties alongside managing the specialized unit, earning the respect of her colleagues for her clinical excellence and the wariness that came with her unexplained rise to prominence. Rumors spread that she had connections to the mysterious new owners, that she was somehow important to people who didn't tolerate disrespect. Marco thrived in their new home, his health improving with access to experimental treatments previously beyond their reach. He'd begun taking online courses again, his brilliant mind gradually recovering alongside his body. Yet he watched Elena with growing concern, noting the gradual changes in his sister, the designer, clothes that had replaced her worn scrubs at home, the subtle security detail that appeared whenever she left the building, the late-night phone calls she took in hushed tones. "You're different," he observed one evening as they shared dinner in the penthouse. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago glittered like scattered diamonds against the night sky. Not bad different. Just changed. Elena set down her fork. "Life is different now." "Because of him," Marco said. "Not a question. This Damien person you think I don't know about." Elena's silence was confirmation enough. "I hear things, Elle. Hospital gossip filters down even to physical therapy sessions." Marco leaned forward. "They say he's dangerous, that his business interests aren't exactly legitimate." "It's complicated," Elena replied, the phrase becoming her mantra whenever questions ventured too close to truths she couldn't voice. "Are you in trouble?" Marco asked, his eyes reflecting genuine fear for the sister, who'd sacrificed everything for him. "Because if you are, we can leave. We can start over somewhere else." The offer, made from a place of pure love despite his continued dependence on her, brought unexpected tears to Elena's eyes. "I'm not in trouble, Marco. She searched for words that wouldn't frighten him. "I'm figuring things out." The truth was more complex than she could explain. In the 6 weeks since that night by Damien's fireplace, their relationship had evolved into something Elena couldn't quite define. They rarely saw each other at the hospital, where Damien maintained professional distance. But several nights a week, the Blacktown car would arrive to bring her to his private residence, where they shared meals, conversation, and a growing intimacy that still hadn't crossed the final threshold into physical relationship. It was during these evenings that Elena saw the man behind the Mafia boss, the brother who still grieved his sister, the businessman whose illegitimate enterprises employed thousands, the strategic mind that could discuss art and literature with the same intensity he applied to his empire's expansion. He showed her a world of privilege and power she'd never imagined, yet always remained attentive to her comfort, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. What frightened Elena wasn't Damien's darkness. It was how easily she'd adapted to it, how quickly she'd learned to look away when his phone rang with calls that sent him into closed-door conversations, how she'd begun to rationalize the armed men who appeared whenever they ventured out together, how the moral certainties that had once defined her were shifting to accommodate this new reality. The following day, Elena was supervising a shift in the trauma unit when the doors burst open. 2 of Damien's men carried in a third, blood soaking through improvised bandages on his chest and abdomen. Multiple GSWs, one of the men reported as they transferred the injured man to a treatment table, took fire during an operation downtown. Elena moved with practiced efficiency, cutting away blood-soaked clothing to reveal 3 bullet wounds across the man's torso. Her team worked silently, following her lead as they established IV access, began blood transfusions, and prepared for emergency surgery. "Call Dr. Vasquez," Elena instructed a nurse, referring to the surgeon Damien had recruited specifically for the unit. "Tell him we need him now." As she stabilized the patient, Elena became aware of a commotion in the corridor outside. Through the glass partition, she saw more of Damien's men arrive, their expressions grim, weapons visible beneath their jackets. Among them was Sofia Vasquez, her usually immaculate appearance disheveled, blood staining her silk blouse. "What happened?" Elena demanded when Sofia entered the treatment area. "Ambush," Sofia replied tersely. The Moretti family decided to make a statement during negotiations. Her eyes darted to the injured man. "How is he?" "Critical but stable enough for surgery," Elena assessed. "Where's Damien?" Something flickered across Sofia's face. Fear, Elena realized with a jolt of alarm. "We don't know. He was separated from the security detail during the attack. We haven't been able to reach him." Cold dread washed over Elena, but her medical training kept her focused on the immediate crisis. "This patient needs surgery now. Is anyone else injured?" 2 more incoming, Sofia confirmed. "Minor wounds." Elena delegated care of the critical patient to her team as Dr. Vasquez arrived, then prepared to receive the additional casualties. Throughout it all, her mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. Damien was missing, possibly injured, possibly worse. Hours later, with all patients stabilized, Elena finally had a moment to process the situation. Sofia had established a command center in Damien's hospital office, coordinating search efforts across the city. The grim efficiency with which Damien's organization mobilized in his absence was both impressive and chilling. "We should have heard something by now," Sophia muttered, ending yet another call. "A ransom demand. A body." She caught herself, glancing at Elena apologetically. "I'm sorry. That was insensitive." "It was honest," Elena replied. The possibility of Damien's death had been hovering at the edges of her consciousness since she'd learned of his disappearance. "What can I do?" Sophia looked surprised by the offer. "You've done your part with the injured men." "I meant to help find Damien," Elena clarified. "There must be something I can do." Understanding dawned in Sophia's eyes. "You care for him," she observed. "More than professionally." "Yes," Elena admitted, the simple word carrying the weight of everything she'd been avoiding acknowledging. "I do." Sophia's expression softened marginally. "The best thing you can do is continue your work, if he's injured." She didn't finish the thought. "If he's injured, he'll need medical care, and if he can make it back to them, he'll come to the place Elena had created, the trauma unit born from his sister's tragedy and Elena's compassion." "I'll be in the unit," Elena decided. "Call me if you hear anything." As she walked back toward the trauma center, Elena's phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. "Warehouse District. Pier 17. Building C. Come alone. Tell no one if you want him to live." Elena froze, staring at the message. Every instinct screamed that this was a trap, that she should immediately alert Sophia and Damien's security team. But the final line burned in her mind. "Tell no one if you want him to live." The choice before her was impossible. Trust Damien's organization to handle the situation, potentially sacrificing his life if the threat was genuine, or place herself in danger on the slim chance she could help him. In the end, it wasn't really a choice at all. Elena had stepped into Damien's world the moment she'd treated his wound in that alley. Whatever happened now, she couldn't walk away. She slipped out of the hospital through a service entrance, avoiding the watchful eyes of Damien's security personnel. A taxi took her to the warehouse district, the driver clearly uncomfortable, dropping a well-dressed woman in such a desolate location after dark. Building C loomed before her, a hulking shadow against the night sky. Elena approached cautiously, her nurse's bag clutched in one hand, pepper spray in the other. The massive sliding door was partially open, revealing darkness beyond. "Hello?" she called, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. "I'm here. Alone." Silence answered her. Elena stepped inside, allowing her eyes to adjust to the gloom. The warehouse appeared empty, its vast interior illuminated only by moonlight filtering through high windows. "Where are you?" she tried again. "I came as you asked." A soft groan emanated from the shadows to her right. Elena moved toward the sound, her heart pounding. In the faint light, she made out a figure slumped against a support column, hands bound behind their back. "Damien?" she whispered, rushing forward. It was indeed Damien, barely conscious, his face bruised and bloodied, his expensive suit torn and stained with blood. Elena knelt beside him, quickly assessing his injuries. Broken ribs, possibly internal bleeding, severe contusions, but nothing immediately life-threatening. "Elena," he rasped, his eyes focusing on her with difficulty. "Trap. Get out." Too late. Elena sensed movement behind her. Before she could turn, something hard pressed against the back of her head, the unmistakable shape of a gun barrel. "Touching reunion," a male voice observed coldly. "The boss and his nurse." Elena remained perfectly still, her medical training keeping her calm despite the terror coursing through her veins. "He needs medical attention," she said steadily. "That's the idea," the man replied. "We want him alive, for now. That's why we called you instead of just putting a bullet in his head." "Who are you?" Elena asked, trying to buy time, to understand the situation. "The name's Moretti," the man said. "Antonio Moretti. Damien here killed my father this morning at what was supposed to be a peaceful negotiation." "Self-defense," Damien growled, more alert now. "Your father drew first." "Details," Moretti dismissed. "The point is, I'm now head of the family, and I'm going to make an example of you, Costas. But first, I need certain account access codes, and you've proven resistant to traditional persuasion methods." Elena could now see the signs of torture on Damien's body, burn marks on his exposed wrists, precise cuts along his collarbone designed to cause pain without fatal damage. "That's where you come in, Nurse Reyes," Moretti continued. Damien here seems to have developed quite an attachment to you. I'm betting he'll be more cooperative if your well-being is at stake. Don't, Damien warned, his eyes locked on Elena's. Give him nothing, no matter what he does to me. Moretti laughed, the sound echoing through the empty warehouse. Noble, but unnecessary. The gun shifted from Elena's head to Damien's. The codes, or I shoot her first, then you. Slowly. Time seemed to slow as Elena processed their situation. They were alone, outnumbered, with no hope of rescue. Damien wouldn't give up the codes to save himself, but he might to save her, which would mean both their deaths anyway, once Moretti had what he wanted. Their only hope lay in the one thing Moretti didn't know. You won't kill me, Elena said quietly, earning surprised looks from both men. You can't. And why is that? Moretti asked, amusement coloring his tone. Because I'm the only one who can save you, she replied, her voice gaining confidence. You've been poisoned. Moretti's laugh faltered. What are you talking about? Your breathing is already labored. Your pupils are dilated. The tremor in your hand isn't just adrenaline. Elena spoke with clinical detachment, her medical knowledge becoming a weapon. The coffee you drank when you arrived, the cup on that crate over there, was laced with a compound that's already working through your system. You have maybe 15 minutes before respiratory failure begins. Uncertainty flickered across Moretti's face. His free hand rose unconsciously to his throat, where he now noticed an uncomfortable tightness. You're bluffing, he said, but doubt had crept into his voice. Am I? Elena challenged. Check your pulse. Feel how it's racing? That's not normal, even in a high-stress situation like this. Moretti's gun hand wavered slightly. If you poisoned me, you have the antidote. In my medical bag, Elena confirmed. But I'll need both hands free to administer it, and I'll need to do it soon, before the damage becomes irreversible. A tense standoff ensued as Moretti visibly struggled with the decision. His breathing had indeed become more labored, though whether from suggestion or actual symptoms was impossible to tell. Treat me first, he finally demanded. Then we continue our negotiation. Elena nodded slowly, reaching for her medical bag with deliberate movements. I need to prepare the injection. It will take a few minutes. As she opened her bag, Elena's fingers closed around a vial of ketamine, a powerful sedative she carried for particularly agitated patients. With her body shielding her actions from Moretti's view, she prepared a syringe with a dose strong enough to incapacitate a man of his size. It's ready, she announced, turning to face Moretti with the syringe. I need to inject this directly into a major blood vessel for it to work quickly. Your arm, please. Moretti extended his arm cautiously, the gun still trained on Damien with his other hand. Elena swabbed his inner elbow with an alcohol pad, located a vein, and swiftly administered the injection. How long until it works? Moretti demanded, his voice edged with new fear. Almost immediately, Elena assured him, stepping back to dispose of the needle in her sharps container. Within 30 seconds, confusion crossed Moretti's features. His gun hand drooped, and he staggered slightly. What did you? Nothing you didn't deserve, Elena replied calmly, watching as the sedative took full effect. Moretti collapsed to the ground, unconscious but breathing. Elena immediately turned her attention to Damien, quickly untying his restraints and properly assessing his injuries. We need to get you out of here. Can you walk? You lied to him, Damien observed, a hint of admiration in his pained voice. There was no poison. I needed him to lower his guard, Elena explained, helping Damien to his feet. And technically, ketamine is a poison in the wrong dose. Damien leaned heavily against her, his breathing labored from what Elena suspected were at least 2 broken ribs. You risked your life coming here alone. You would have done the same for me, she replied simply. As they made their slow way toward the warehouse entrance, Damien suddenly tensed. Wait, Moretti wouldn't have come alone. The words had barely left his mouth when the large doors slid open, revealing silhouettes against the night sky. Elena felt Damien push her behind him despite his injuries, preparing to face whatever came next. But the figures that entered weren't Moretti's men. They were Damien's security team, led by a grim-faced Sophia. Secure the perimeter, Sophia barked to the men behind her. Find any of Moretti's people and detain them. Her eyes widened at the sight of Damien and Elena. Sir, you're hurt. Nothing fatal, Damien assured her. Thanks to Elena. Sophia's gaze shifted to Elena, something like reluctant respect in her eyes. We tracked your phone. You should have told us about the message. They would have killed him. Elena replied, without apology. And they could have killed you, Sophia countered, which would have destroyed him anyway. The blunt assessment hung in the air as Damien was helped to a waiting vehicle. Elena rode with him to the hospital, providing initial treatment during the journey. In the trauma unit, she oversaw his care personally, refusing to leave his side despite her own exhaustion. Hours later, with Damien stabilized and resting, Elena finally allowed herself to process the night's events. She'd lied, sedated a man against his will, potentially killed him if his men hadn't found him in time. She'd violated every ethical standard she'd sworn to uphold as a nurse, and she would do it all again without hesitation. "You're thinking too loudly," Damien murmured, his eyes opening to focus on her. Despite his injuries, his gaze held the same intensity she'd come to associate uniquely with him. "I'm wondering who I'm becoming," Elena admitted, taking the seat beside his bed. "Someone who survives," Damien replied. "Someone who protects what matters to her." His hand reached for hers, fingers intertwining. "Someone I don't deserve." Elena squeezed his hand gently. "Maybe we're past questions of deserving." The weeks that followed brought significant changes. Moretti's attempted coup failed, his authority undermined by his capture at the hands of a nurse. Damien's position was strengthened, his reputation for indestructibility enhanced by his survival. But the greatest transformation was in Elena herself. She'd crossed a line that night in the warehouse, one that couldn't be uncrossed. She'd chosen Damien, not just the man, but his world, with all its moral complexities and dangers. 3 months after the warehouse incident, Elena stood in Damien's private residence, watching snow fall over Chicago's skyline. The trauma unit had expanded to serve not just Damien's associates, but a growing network of people who fell through society's cracks. Marco had begun an internship at one of Damien's legitimate technology firms, his recovery progressing beyond anyone's expectations. Elena heard Damien's approach before she felt his arms encircle her waist from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. Their relationship had deepened into something neither had anticipated that night in the alley. A partnership built on mutual respect, understanding, and a love that had grown stronger through fire. "Penny for your thoughts," he murmured against her ear. "I was thinking about choice," Elena replied, leaning back against his chest. "How sometimes the most important ones don't feel like choices at all." Damien turned her gently to face him. "Do you regret it? Any of it?" Elena considered the question seriously. She had compromised parts of herself, adjusted moral boundaries she'd once thought immovable. She lived now in a world of shadows and power that occasionally still frightened her. But she had also helped build something meaningful, a medical program that served the forgotten, a relationship that challenged and fulfilled her, a life that made difference in ways her previous existence never could have. "No," she said finally, with the certainty of someone who had examined her conscience thoroughly. "I don't regret it, but I worry sometimes about where the line is, how far I would go for you, for this life we've created." Damien's expression grew serious. "There will always be lines, Elena, boundaries neither of us should cross. I don't want you to lose yourself in my world. Maybe it's not about losing myself," she mused. "Maybe it's about becoming a more complicated version of who I always was." His hand rose to cup her cheek, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheekbone with reverence. "I never intended this, you know. When I had the hospital bought, when I created the trauma unit, it was about justice for my sister. I never expected to find you. The poor nurse who gave her last $20 to a stranger." Elena smiled, echoing the story that had begun their journey. "The extraordinary woman who saw me at my most vulnerable and chose compassion over fear," Damien corrected. "Who continues to choose compassion, even in a world that rarely rewards it?" Outside, snow continued to fall, transforming Chicago's harsh edges into something softer, more forgiving. Within the warmth of the apartment, Elena and Damien stood at the center of the empire they now shared, his power and her healing combined into something neither could have created alone. The path ahead would never be simple. There would be challenges, moral dilemmas, moments when the darkness of Damien's world threatened to overwhelm the light Elena brought to it. But they would face those moments together, each making the other stronger, better, more complete. Elena leaned forward, pressing her lips to Damien's in a kiss that held both promise and acceptance. She had given her last $20 to a stranger that cold Chicago night, never imagining that simple act of kindness would transform her life completely. The Mafia boss who owned the hospital had claimed her heart, and she had claimed his soul in return. A fair exchange in a world where true connections were the rarest currency of all. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.